Hello, everyone. It's time for Tea Talk, where the issues are relevant, real, and relaxing. Enjoy.
Thank you, Flair. Let me make sure I got my little buttons right there. Okay, very good. Thank you, Flair, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to just greet all of you today. We have a very, very, very special day. Typically on Father's Day weekend, we do Father's Day, and we're still going to do Father's Day. So before I go further, let me just say Happy Father's Day to all of you here that are watching. And our show on Father's Day will be tomorrow on Sunday. But today we want to talk to you about a very special holiday, Juneteenth, as we call it. And there are a lot of festivities that are going on this weekend. So I thought we'd give you an extra show today to make sure you know what's going on. Not only do you know about the festivities, but you know your history. And it's accurate because I don't know about you, but I was handed down a lot of things coming up in East Texas about Juneteenth as best we understood and knew and remembered. So, in talking to our guest today, I'm finding out that some of those things were not actually true. Some of them were true, and some of them were as best they could remember, you know? And so, I'm going to learn the truth today, and you're going to learn it too. And we're going to spread it. We're going to be better able to celebrate Juneteenth and to pass that history on to our children and to our churches and groups accurately. Okay. So Flair is from Tea Talk, and she's the only one that was able to come on this morning. But what did you know about Juneteenth? You're from
Absolutely
Louisiana.
nothing. Absolutely nothing. I moved here from Louisiana about 20 years ago, and I started hearing about Juneteenth, and I was like, okay, whatever. And they said it's just when the slaves found out they were free in Texas and everything. And I never actually really celebrated because I didn't understand it until about a year ago when I went to Savannah, Georgia, and I learned some history there, but I knew nothing of what Juneteenth was.
I know, and that is so strange because as myself, I'm the same thing. I'm from Texas, but I didn't know, and I don't know if it's because my family didn't know. History is not like it is now on the computer. You got it in books. It's passed down. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna tell you the truth. So I've got two wonderful ladies here who are historians, whose families have been a part of Juneteenth and who were there, and they know the truth. So they're going to help us today. So, Tea Talk, if you'll help me welcome these two young ladies. The first one is Algenita Scott Davis. Thank you, Algenita, for coming to Tea Talk today. And then the other young lady is Debra Blacklock Sloan. Thank you, Miss Debra. It's good to meet you, and we're excited about what you're going. So, listen. The first thing you do, tell me about your growing up. Algeria, why don't you go first? What was Juneteenth like? Cause are you from Houston?
I am from Houston. I am third generation, and more importantly, my daughter, my children are like fifth generation
Oh,
Houstonians.
wow.
So I learned about Juneteenth, always knew about it coming up, heard about it from my mom, who talked about how they were in Fifth Ward. I'm a Fifth Ward girl. And they
Oh,
would walk from Fifth Ward over to Third Ward to celebrate Juneteenth at this park that was forested, had all these trees in it. It was a really, really big deal. That was the day when uh, Black folks were not required to come to work, which was a big deal. Playland Park was open to Black people that particular day, if you were stupid enough to go then. There were a lot of places that were open on Juneteenth for Blacks because the whites of Texas, in their normal segregated lifestyle, had decided that that would be the day to celebrate. But it was only within the past 30 years or so that I really began to learn more about its history, why it happened, and a lot of the inaccuracies that have been passed down through the years to try to justify the a terrible position in which enslaved people were and where, how, and where they lived, and how they were treated, and how this concept of freedom had not eluded them, but had been kept from them deliberately, even after a year, 2 years rather, after the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, see, that's why I want to stop. Two things. You just gave us so many good nuggets there, but I just thought, wow, how amazing that people actually walked from Fifth Ward to Third Ward. That's a lot of walking, but they had to get together at this park where it was free. And so the Blacks did know about Juneteenth. They were celebrating it back there. And so were they typically doing the watermelon and the red soda water? Is that kind of a myth, or is that what y'all, that's what we did in East Texas?
Yeah, well, I don't really know. I don't know as far as this whole the watermelon thing. Knowing my mother and her family, they had some fried chicken and some shoe boxes. Okay. And when they walked over here, they did not walk over here.
Well, you know what I think?
Hot dogs.
I think the reason why we had watermelon is my grandfather was the farmer. And that was the time, because he would sell the watermelons, but on Juneteenth and places like that, he would let us eat it. So I don't think it was a kind of a myth thing, like what they take it to come. That was what we had to eat. So, Debra, tell me about you growing up with Juneteenth. Where are you from? Are you from Houston?
Yes, I am a native Houstonian, sixth generation Texan, and I also grew up in Frenchtown in the Fifth Ward. So Juneteenth to me is special because it's my mom's birthday. Okay. And so I'd like to follow that with that. My family didn't talk about Juneteenth. I just knew that on June 19th, we'd have barbecue, red soda water, watermelon, and that's all I knew about Juneteenth. I didn't know. My family didn't talk about it, and it probably has to do with because of the things that go along with slavery, anything negative. I didn't know. I had no idea what Juneteenth was about until I was like in my 40s.
Wow.
And even if you ask them, Lady O, even if you ask the seniors about the holidays, they were very reluctant to talk about what they consider the dark days.
Right.
And I did not push my uncles, my grandmother's brothers. I did not push them when they would say, "Why do you want to talk about the dark days? Why do you want to talk about the dark days?" They did not want to talk about the period after Reconstruction in which they were born, where so much mistreatment, lynchings, death, the disparities occurred. They didn't want to talk about that.
Right. And I think that when you said that, see, there were still lynchings going on. I mean, even today we still have it in a different way, but there was so much mistreatment that if Blacks were touting it or making a big deal about it, they could possibly be killed or hung. So it was something, like you said, you just didn't talk about it. Well,
yeah, Houston had a law that said that 3 Negroes, even prior to emancipation, they could not gather on the street.
Yeah,
not any 3, and they were enslaved and could not gather on the street. It was against the law.
And so let's go down the list a little bit for time frame, because I do know, and I just learned this out a couple of years ago, that Memorial Park had a Black I want to say soldiers there, and there was a big massacre there and hangings and so forth. And I don't know what year that was, but my point being that when this is all going on with Juneteenth, it was still not a safe place for Black people to do whatever they wanted to do. They had to come together in a safe place. So tell me about what the original part of Juneteenth, how it started off. I know, Algenita, you have some photos that you have that from your parents, and Debra, you want to start off, and then Algenita can pull up the reel with her photos.
Yeah, sure. Debra's an official historian. Let's let her really talk about this.
Okay, yeah.
So basically, again, Juneteenth was officially celebrated, or Freedom Day was celebrated in Houston on the 20th of June, because that's when the Union troops arrived in Houston. So the 19th is for Galveston and the 20th is for us. But again, they were looking for some place to have a celebration. Jack Yates and Reverend Dibble and their congregations would normally, they were in Lubbock's Grove in the 2nd Ward, and then they found a grove near the 4th Ward, but they found out a lynching took place there. So they were looking for another site to have their picnics. And so they settled on Emancipation Park. Richard Allen was instrumental in finding the place. But, it was someplace they could celebrate freedom, celebrate the idea that now they were free to do whatever they wanted to do. And so this park was special. And it was a community effort to pull their resources together, pull their monies together. And my good friend Bill Milligan would say it took a village to get this transaction done. And again, they were looking for a place to celebrate Juneteenth, a place they could call their own.
Right. So was this in 18? What year was this? Oh,
They purchased a park in 1872.
1872.
But in between that time, they were looking for places to hold their celebrations. Right. And a couple of times, some of the white residents protested, and so that's when they knew, well, we've got to find our own place.
Right. So, Algenita, you want to talk about some of your pictures, kind of take us down that line of, I know you got some beautiful pictures about some celebrations and some things that your father, as we are honoring fathers this week, we honor your dad and all of the dads, but I had met your dad, I think, years ago. I think I did. We go way back. We're going to start giving our age out, but I know your dad was very prominent of it and very into what was going on and being actively involved. So you want to talk about your pictures, Neil?
Yeah, I want to, the pictures that we have are pictures from the days of actual celebration.
Okay.
Of course, there were parades, there were gatherings, and the African American Library at the Gregory School had several of these pictures, and we have some of those because people decorated their horses, they decorated their carriages, they decorated. I mean, they actually had parades and events where they could show off themselves because it was a big deal. It was for people to parade and let folks know that this was a time for celebration. And they focused on this particular part, but the picture that's up now shows the neighborhood. When we talk about the neighborhoods in which African Americans in Houston live, they lived in very lovely places. Most of these neighborhoods, of course, have been destroyed by our freeways and by our gentrification. But these are not other folks' houses. These are Black folks' houses that you're looking at. This is what Freedmanstown looked like. These people were brilliant. They had, you can see the streetcar line in the street, but they definitely had homes that they had built and constructed. They had put the streets down themselves. They had to do for themselves. This was not where the city had come in to make the neighborhood better. And so they would gather and then create parades where they would show off.
Float. Is that like one of the floats? It looks like a wagon.
Yeah, that's what they would have. They would have the floats, and of course, they were pulled by the horses. And that's a particular club. This the Spirit of Charity showing this, and they were excited, and they so professionally did these celebrations, and that's what's phenomenal about the pictures that you're seeing, because they dressed up. It was not some ragtag thing. You can see the streetcar lines in the pavement.
On the horses and the wheels. This was very, very, it's not like just throwing something on there. They really had beautifully decorated these horses.
Right, because they knew that this was a time for celebration, and they were not going to miss out on celebrating. And that's when you see at different points, because as Debra said, once they identified that location, they had a place to celebrate. So here the initial purchasers, and there were hundreds of people who contributed to this purchase. The initial purchasers then were people who were formerly enslaved. And so 6 years out of being called property, that they were then able to actually raise money and actually make that purchase. And that was not without angst, because there were lawsuits that said they had no right to purchase. And there were lawsuits that said, you know, if you borrow money and you put these new facilities on this property, they had liens against the property. This was a private activity. This wasn't public land.
Church, I'm sorry, excuse me for interrupting, but he went to the next picture. Go back one. Is that a church? It looks like Bethel over there.
Yeah, it is a church. It's that's probably it might be Antioch, and those are Jack Yates's daughters. Those two ladies or his daughters.
Now this is really important to us too, because our church came out of Antioch. We went to Antioch. So
I remember.
So we were down there when John Hood Westbrook was there, and so a lot of that historic thing, Emancipation Park, and all those things. We were a part of that, but you don't stop to really ask or find people like this to help you understand what was really going on. So these were Jack Yates' daughters, and they were a part of. I think they started Antioch, if I'm not wrong. They were
right.
There were a group of folks, and I know that Reverend Yates was the first. He was the first pastor, right, Debra?
Yes. The first pastor.
And when you see the building Antioch, you see this fine masonry that these folks had. Now keep in mind where they were out of slavery, but they knew their trades, they knew their stuff. They built this city, they built it. And then you see what you see Antioch now with the covering of those bricks, you don't see them. But that's a lot of masonry that went into that gorgeous building. That because of their defiance with gentrification, that Antioch has remained there as the beacon for exactly where the Fourth Ward, the aristocracy really of African Americans resided.
I want to talk about that too. John, you can go to the next picture, so I don't want to miss that. What is this a picture of here?
Those are people in the park, aren't they? Those are people in the park. I thought, is Jack Yates on that one? He may not be on that one. No, he's not on that.
No, I don't think he's. I think this is after. Yeah.
So that might be the park.
Yeah, because you can see the kind of the fencing in the back. Yeah, so you can see that, and the trees, because what Emancipation Park was loaded with trees, and that was a big deal. My mother kept talking about all the trees that were there, and in fact, we asked the park services, a man who was here this past weekend, you know, what can we do to get funding to try to restore a lot of the tree linings and the tree emphasis that occurred in the park, but that had gone away over the years as those trees were either removed or died.
Pastor Johnny, can you move to the next picture and make sure we get all the pictures in? Okay, now, Sister Debra, you want to talk about that one?
Well, that's the photo of a group in Austin, and those are, I think the caption should read something like, those are the last of the, they always use the word slave, but I like to say enslaved. Our ancestors were not slaves, they were enslaved. And so that would be a group of the last enslaved group in Austin, Texas. But look how fine their dress. Those people went to church service before they went to the park. So this was a big deal. You know, you dressed up, you got on the trolley, and then you took that to the park. So this was some exciting times, and people were really just glad to be able to celebrate their Freedom Day, as it was initially called.
And you know, I think about, I can't help but reflect, and we're going to move up there in a minute to about current. But nowadays, you know, you go to the park or whatever, you got the dresses that are barely a piece of fabric covering certain parts. But I know that back in the day, they were very proud, and they put on their best because they wanted to be looked at as serious, important, intelligent African Americans. So I just look at how they dress there, and I know we wouldn't dare wear that now. But I think still the pride that came with that is what I'm seeing from them.
Yeah, as a people, our attire made a statement about us, and it always has. And one of the things that if you were denied or you did not have the opportunity to have appropriate attire, what you did was you searched for that, and that one of the first things you did as an African American was that you sought to have the look to be appropriate and to represent yourself as somebody with knowledge and with finesse. And that's exactly what they were doing.
Well, let's talk about, are there any more pictures? Okay, now that pictures, tell us about that one.
This is a picture that was taken at the time of the celebration of the reconstruction of the park. The park went through several stages. Of course, as I said initially, where there were efforts by the private individuals, the Colored Festival and Emancipation Association, where it would purchase items and buildings to go in the park and sheds and stuff, because they did not just want a piece of land. They wanted there to be structures that they could utilize during the entire year. And then the stimulus package that was done with the Public Works Act in 1938, 39, and the Roosevelt's effort to recover from the Depression, that's what constructed the two main buildings there, the Cultural Center and that swimming site. So by
And
1940,
is that Emancipation Park?
that's Emancipation Park. The cultural building that's immediately behind these people, that was constructed by 1940. And you can see there where the stage in that cultural center was allowed to open towards the west side of the park so that the park could serve people outside the stage. They were very creative when they did this, to serve people outside and not just inside. So you can see that the back of the stage that's now been redone so that you could take advantage of the building. And then the individuals who are on this picture are contributors. They are people with the tax increment reinvestment zone. They are legislators.
There, I see her there right in front with those blue pants.
They are right. And basically what the terrorists in the tax zone did was pump in about $33 million to redo this park. The tax zone, terrorist acts in behalf of the city of Houston. And so Phil Freelon, who's a tall guy on towards the right side, next to Ms. Bostic, that's the guy who was the architect. So he took us to New York. He took us to Chicago. He took us to places so we could see, you know, what these parks look like in other places. And so then he came back and they made the recommendation of exactly what should be done to modify the park and how those millions of dollars should be spent. There is still another part of it at the blessing stage that really needs to be constructed. But this group had just simply gathered to mark that basically the rededication of the park, which just so happened to be 100 years after the courts ruled that African Americans, that this park would be dedicated as a sacred place. It took the courts to do that because there was so much fight and evil that came to try to disturb this opportunity to have this sacred place. And that's why you see the folks there who were celebrating that whole reconstruction of the park. That's the park that you see today.
Right. And I want to just compel us all to go and look at it. I mean, with living in the suburbs out here, I need to go in and look at it. And I know there are some festivities going on, and I want to give those real quickly because I want to go back and kind of summarize what we said, because we want to make sure we know what Juneteenth is. And so the festivities are going. I know the mayor is having a parade in Acres Home. Is that Saturday or Sunday?
The mayor has, you have to go on the City of Houston website because there are so many events. The mayor decided, with everybody doing everything, what he wanted to do was to get all of the information there. And so you can actually see that. The Emancipation Park Conservancy, which is the kind of friends of the park, they are coordinating a lot of events that have been going on since June the 1st. And Debra and I have been participating in those events in the evening. On the June the 18th, of course, there will be a 4 o'clock program on the Emancipation Park site that will honor people who raise money. It was Garnett Coleman's vision to redo the park, and he was the one that did that, but it was the Kenders who also contributed to that. The parks director went out and raised money, Houston Endowment, a lot of people raised money for that. So they're gonna recognize those folks for this last effort.
What website do they go to get the information?
Emancipation Park Conservancy's website.
Okay.
And I want to say it's something like EPC or something cute, but ultimately it's Emancipation Park Conservancy, and they will tell you exactly everything that's happening at the park. They're also doing some entertainment on the Saturday night and Sunday night at the park.
Yeah, and just be safe. So anyway, Deborah, let's go back and look at to make sure do a summary. You know, I'm a teacher, so I like to summarize, make sure we didn't miss it. So Juneteenth, summarizing up, started when, and what exactly is it? If somebody were to ask me, what is Juneteenth? What should I say?
So Juneteenth is when Granger arrived in Galveston and he enforced Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay.
Because remember, he instituted it in 1862. Then by January of 1863, so that by the time June 1865 comes, they are coming to enforce his proclamation. Okay, and again, you know, they lost the war, and they were finally saying, okay, it's time to let these people go. They are emancipated, even though General Order Number 3 says the freedmen are to remain at, I have to do this, at home. Yes. And work out contracts with their masters. So people didn't move right away. Some people didn't move right away. Some people were even hidden. Some slaveholders hid some of their enslaved population because they did not want to turn them loose. So again, it's known as the Day of Jubilee, Freedom Day, Emancipation Day. And again, it's when Lincoln's proclamation was finally enforced by the Union troops who came, who spread the news across Texas. And Ashton Villa, may I please say this? Nobody read anything from Ashton Villa. That is a tourism ploy, and I'll tell the people at Ashton Villa that. The Osterman building is where the Union troops would have been, and that's where they would have read the proclamation of anything, not Ashton Villa.
Okay. You know, and I went down for a big celebration they had on the 100th year in Galveston, and they reenacted with the Buffalo Soldiers coming and then coming to read the Declaration, you know, Emancipation Proclamation on the steps of the courthouse. And I know they have a lot of historic markers there for you to read. It's really a very educational place, but I noticed you said that Galveston celebrated on the 19th, but Houston celebrated on the 20th because they came to Houston. But you know, part of what my family told me was true. They said that we didn't find out until a couple of years later. So everybody may have known, but it was not enforced for a couple of years. Would that be the right thing to say?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and think about this. The slaveholders would have talked about the proclamation in front of the house servants, who would have gone back and told the people in the quarter, so they knew it was in the newspapers, because they were because Texas was part of the Confederacy, because they instituted the 1861 Constitution, which said no Negro shall be emancipated.
And that's in Texas, right?
That's in Texas, right?
You know, when I was growing up, I thought that the southern states were Mississippi and Georgia and Louisiana. I didn't know Texas was a southern state. Growing up, I thought we were, you know, in Texas.
Texas, the only reason that Texas exists is because this was a territory. Stephen F. Austin had decided that if you bring a slave into this territory, you would get 80 acres. So if you bought 10, you get 800 acres. And the slavery offended the Mexican government. So in Mexico, the legislature in Cornelio passed a law that said there shall be no slavery in our territories, including the recalcitrant Texas. And Texas says, oh, absolutely not. That's why the Alamo was fought. The Battle of the Alamo, Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and all of this, they fought because they were not going to be told they could not have their slaves. This is about slavery. Texas was created because it refused to abide by the Mexican law because it was a Mexican territory. They refused to abide by that. And that's why they fought the battle of at Alamo. That's why they fought the battle of San Jacinto, because they wanted to make sure that they were going to be allowed to be free and therefore create the Republic of Texas, where then they could have their slaves and that get Stephen F. Austin out of jail, and then he could be happy and continue this whole dastardly program of slavery.
You know, you
not
said,
only that though, Algenita. Yeah.
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say not only that, if I can add to that.
Go
So
ahead.
when they brought the enslaved population in, they told the Mexicans that they were indentured and they had to work out their debt. So that was deceitful as well. But Algenita is certainly correct. It was all about slavery. I mean, you come into somebody else's country and you do what you want to do. So it was this whole ruse that these people were indentured. They had to work their debt out for 100 years. Okay. So, but it was actually slavery.
So, okay, let's kind of back up a little bit, just kind of make sure I'm hearing it right too. So, because this territory belonged to Mexico.
That's correct.
Yes.
And am I correct in that the people here and stole it from Mexico or fought to take it, and they were given land, if they were given encouragement, if they bought slaves in to work the land, how much land were they given?
80, my understanding, it was 80 acres per individual that they brought in. Because what the goal, Stephen F. Austin's goal as the father of Tejas, Texas, was that he wanted Texas to be like Louisiana. Of course, all the Six Flags of Texas, and so Louisiana, of course, built a tremendous economy on cotton and working enslaved people. So many of the slaves had come through there. Few slaves then came in through the port and came in through where there's now Barber's Cut in Texas. But Texas was kind of late to the game in terms of organizing, because the indigenous people weren't allowing the Texans to do what had happened in Louisiana. So they wanted to make sure that Texas would build its economy in the same way Louisiana did, off of the backs of the enslaved persons. And that's why there would be land grants to individuals when they brought the slaves in, because that would help settle the Texas part of the Mexican territory.
Wow. And we got to go, but I just had to put this one little thing in. So we couldn't get our 2 acres and a mule, but they got 80 acres per person. Are you kidding me? And so when Sheila Jackson Lee talks about reparation and all this stuff, it's like we as African Americans have been able to do so much with so much oppression and so much unfairness that has gone on since the beginning. But even with Reconstruction and all that stuff, it has been a big joke. It's been a big thing where they have always tried to put us back and given more, 80 acres per person? Are you serious? So that's why it's not equitable. We can never catch up. Give me my 80 acres and let me see what I can do with it. And the Blacks never got theirs.
Right. It was really the personification of evil. That's the only way that you can describe what happened in this, what was then a territory. If you look back at each of the lawsuits, each of the efforts where people were coming together to just recognize, I mean, can you imagine the fact that here are these people raising money for a park when people needed food, they needed hospitals, they needed doctors, they needed all of the essentials. But the concept of freedom was more important to them than actually getting a hospital set up and getting things, because they wanted to make sure that the freedom was essential to all of the other needs that had to be addressed. That's what was so fascinating about these individuals who were formerly enslaved, that they recognized the most important part of life was freedom. And then the other things, the food, the cemeteries, the hospitals, all of that would come later. First recognize freedom, and then those things would happen. When we got ready to redo this park, we were criticized as a governmental entity, why are you redoing the park in an area that is gentrifying? Because people were concerned that you redo this park and little Becky is going to be running around with her dog and her baby carriage. So why is it that you would be spending this kind of money on the park?
Wow.
The important thing was that we had to make sure that the concept of freedom and its recognition was preserved. That's the only reason that our young people, and that's is so important. That's why what you're doing today, this is so important, that our young people will understand that it is the freedom that was fought for, that the 500,000 people died to do, because somebody felt that it was more important to build an economy off of the bodies and the blood of human beings.
Right.
And until our young people recognize their value, I will tell my students this all the time, they are so important. People sacrifice so much for them. They cannot afford to cast away their life or to waste their energies, because so much has happened to bring them to this point.
And so much is at stake. I want to say this too, and I don't know, Flair, you can tell me about my time, but I want to talk about the Black church, okay? Because it just really hurts me when I see our people abandoning the Black church. And whenever I know, slaves on up, the Black church was very instrumental. As a Black historian, a person who had family in there, tell us about the Black church and how it fit into Texas and what we're Juneteenth.
So with the Black church, it was everything to even to our people. Even when they were enslaved, they had faith that someday they were going to be emancipated. But the Black church served as a nucleus of the community. They started off in brush arbors. In some instances, white citizens allowed them to worship in their church in the balcony. But because we were not allowed into white mainstream America, everything that had to do with politics, social, educational, it was done in the church. The Freedmen's Bureau's schools were established in churches. So education, everything came out of the church. And so you are correct in saying that we need to remember the original purpose of the church. People were the pastors, Jack Yates and all the others said, do three things: get a trade, get an education, buy property. All of that came out of the church. And again, they were the nucleus of the Black community. And it goes back to the idea to purchase property to celebrate their emancipation. This came out of the church. So the church was everything to Black people. And we need to remember that. We don't need to stray away from that.
And the church focused on knowledge.
That's right.
Whatever, it is the basic tenet of the church about knowledge and gaining knowledge and reading, and it's the word, and that concept of knowledge and teaching individuals. That's what intelligence is about. The church is it injected knowledge into a race of people. That's what the church did by either teaching using the biblical tenets, but in applying the biblical tenets to life and the other institutions. When you think of the number of universities that were created by the church,
that's right.
The schools, the initial schools in Houston, Gregory Institute, those schools, that was because the church people came together, and then they could pay. They raised their own money. They paid for their own teachers. They did their own thing. And it was the church that really did. And when I explained that to, talk to my students about the role of the church and bringing that knowledge forth, because it was, if you even look at Texas Southern University as a classic example, those first meetings were the church bringing the people from Marshall to help do the extension classes once they had graduated from Gregory School, once they had completed their 8th grade education. then they had to go to the next level. There was a Prairie View, but there was nothing in Houston. But it was the church that said, we will bring in those folks from Marshall and start the extension classes. That's why the beginning of TSU predates the University of Houston.
Yeah.
Because that 1925, those extension classes, where they were coming in utilizing the church buildings for the training and for the extension classes. And afterwards, then the school district said, we will then organize the colored junior college and the white junior college. But it was the church that set that plate of knowledge to learn. And that's where the information was passed on with the subject matter information. But it all came out of the church. It all did.
It came out of church, and even church members, the lawyers and things like that. They were educated and they could read. And so they helped other people read, help them get land and so forth. But when I'm hearing you say this, Gregory Lincoln and that kind of, I did my student teaching. It was called Gregory Lincoln when I went through, but I'm sure it was, you just said, what did you call it a minute ago? I wrote it, Gregory.
It's the Gregory Institute.
Gregory Institute.
Same school, Gregory Lincoln?
No, it's a different school.
It's a different school. Okay. And so who was Gregory Lincoln? I'm trying to figure out where did this name come from? Because I know, wasn't there a hospital too that was, what was it called? What was the Black hospital called?
Oh, you mean the Houston Negro Hospital?
Houston Negro Hospital.
But in Freedmanstown, there was a hospital where the doctors had gathered. When they
the Union Hospital,
started that.
Okay.
So I think that Gregory Lincoln came from the fact that the school was named for Edmund Gregory, a Union general, and then of course named for Lincoln, the great emancipator. So I think that's where that name might have come from.
Okay.
Yeah. But Gregory School started out as Gregory Institute was private. That was private where the people put together. It wasn't where the public school, Mrs. Baldwin didn't run over here and say she's going to educate the Negroes in Freedmanstown. It was the people in Freedmanstown, which was the first area in which they were allowed to live, that actually put the schools together.
And so Freedmanstown is 3rd Ward?
No, the 4th Ward. The 4th Ward.
It's 4th Ward.
Downtown, and then to the west, where current Freedmanstown is today. That constitutes the 4th Ward.
Yeah, so, the original 4th wards of Houston were at the intersection of Main and Congress.
Okay,
Main and that's why we had a Black Wall Street on Milam. My father-in-law's office was on the 2nd floor on Milam. And that's where all of that, in that area where the Market Square, that's where the Chronicle building was. That's where Trinity United Methodist Church was there at that site, and they discovered artifacts from the church after they tore down the Chronicle building, and now they built this super Heinz building. But that was 4th Ward. Most of what's downtown now was 4th Ward, because if you think about the intersection of Main and Congress, it was 4th Ward, and a section of 4th Ward was then where Blacks were allowed to live closer to the bayou, because that was the undesired property. Can you imagine undesired?
Where did the white people live?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. Everywhere, yeah. So when once our ancestors were brave enough to leave the plantation, most of them left the plantations, came down the San Felipe Road, and they walked for miles. And you know how hot it is today? Imagine walking with children in tow, with nothing, and they settled right on, they stepped on the bayou, they stepped in vacant buildings until they could, buy land. Those who could build things, those were the people who could buy land first. But again, they left those plantations walking for days, sleeping outside in the elements,
Bayou, let me ask you this too, because I'm sure you all know it. I'm not from Houston, I'm from East Texas. So a lot of this stuff I don't know either, but I know in the bayou, they have all these little houses along the bayou that
the shanties. The shanties,
Were those Black people's homes? Or?
Those were shanties. Some people built like little lean-tos or whatever, but you can imagine the terror of white people when they saw all these people coming from the plantation live the American dream. Yeah, it was frightful for them. The newspaper said they should go back to their homes. They don't need to be
Yes.
here. But
Can
they
Yes.
were
can we
determined.
get that 80 acres? They would get us a decent, I mean, why are they getting 80 acres and we get nothing? I mean, it's
Right.
And then with the turn of the century, they decided, oh, we made a mistake. We should
Right.
not have allowed them to have that precious land along the bayou. So they
Yeah.
turned what was called Buffalo Drive
uh-huh.
to Allen, named for the founders. Now, keep in mind those two brothers that came here and concocted this myth of Houston, the city. One of them died and the other one left. So it was really Baldwin, the woman's
The
money,
woman's
the
money.
wife's money that was used to create Houston. That's another lie.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Buffalo Bayou
So was it the woman's
Drive,
the
huh?
woman's money? Was it the woman's money? Because I heard that too. That
It was her. It was
Was her
her
money.
daddy's money. It was
yeah,
her daddy
they were
Baldwin's.
saying back in the day, women couldn't own property and they couldn't
Right.
find things. So therefore, men
Right.
were looking for a woman whose daddy was rich. And even though he didn't really love her, he would marry her because he wanted her money and her property. So you
Uh-huh.
telling me that Houston had a little situation like that too?
Absolutely. With the quote Allen brothers, the founders of
Yeah.
Houston that came up with the map,
Uh-huh.
one of them left, okay, Houston. The other one died. And the one who died, his wife, Charlotte Baldwin,
Mhm.
was the one who actually put the school stuff together for Houston and actually was the one that really created Houston itself.
A woman. Get out of here.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Takes a
Okay, let
woman.
me ask you this too, Algenita, because this is where y'all live. When we first got here, we went over on South Park and we were in the apartments and so forth. Our dream was to get a house over there off of South where
South
you
Park.
South Park. And
Mhm.
we lived in South Park, but it was the street. What's it called, baby? Anyway, I can't say what we called it because we called it wasn't River Oaks, it was another name. And
Yes. Yes.
I can't say what we,
Yeah. Yeah. I lived in South Park too. I understand.
okay.
Yes. But
So
once they
we
come,
dreamed of living over in South Park, not South Park. We were in South Park. We dreamed of living off of Southmore, and I don't know what that area is
yeah.
called, but
Mhm,
I know that now they're trying to get that. There's some
and
people trying to take that into
but historic. But the thing about that location and those homes, they were built, that McGregor section was built because when they went along Allen, they converted Buffalo Drive to Allen Parkway so that the Hogg family could build River Oaks. So
Wow.
this was right about the time of the Depression. And they started building River Oaks. They did not allow Jews or blacks. So the Jews went over on Bray's Bayou and built Riverside, the Third Ward area that you see with TSU now. That was that's primarily a Jewish community. The whole McGregor area, Jewish community, the Wine Gardens, the Jaworskis, all those people. That's why, because they were not allowed to go into River Oaks. That's why they went over and started that neighborhood. But what was ironic about it is that Freedmanstown and River Oaks have the same zip code, 77019. And that is because they decided it was good to live on the bayou. So River Oaks is on the bayou. And instead of calling it Buffalo Drive, they call it Allen Parkway. So they just ran through all those homes and took all of that property that belonged to and had been dedicated, that lowland, dedicated and allowed for blacks to live. They just wiped that out and they put some housing there for white project, San Felipe Village. And so most of what was the initial part of Freedmanstown was wiped out with that 1929, 1930 construction of River Oaks.
Wow. See, that's the part I couldn't figure it out. But now I realized, because I taught out that way, and the Jewish people own those big houses because we didn't own them. I know we finally eventually got some of them, but but in that area, we were like drive through and like, oh my goodness, if I could live over here. Because you're right. I remember when Muhammad Ali came and he wanted to buy a house in River Oaks. And he had the money to do it, but they said, no Negroes gonna live over here in River Oaks. This is totally, I don't care how much money you got. So that's really interesting. So this is good. So let me just kind of in summing up things here. So you know what's going on now in the world. And as we last year finally got Juneteenth to be a federal holiday. So you look at the time we're talking about from the very beginning and all the way up, and now it is finally a federal holiday. And so people don't even know what it is because it's been here so long. So how do you think, do you think it's going to make any impact on Houston or what we're doing today? The fact that we did finally get it. I know they're building, putting monies into building like the El Dorado Club back up that area there, or what's going on over in, is that considered for, that's Fifth Ward, right?
That's the third ward.
That's where Texas Southern is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the greater third ward, the greater third ward.
Greater
Right.
third.
You know, yeah. But I would just sum it up and just say that we need to keep talking about the story. We need to pass on the story of Juneteenth, and that's how I would sum it up.
Right.
We need to pass along the story and the importance of Juneteenth.
Yeah, and so much is important that people realize that control, the issue is power.
Yeah.
And control of it. And freedom is power.
Yes, ma'am.
And every step that's taken, that we take, there's another step that's taken to try to recover some of that power. That's what's happening right now, if you really think about it. So as you look at the conveyance of land and we have not fought valiantly enough to preserve the ownership that our forefathers did when it comes to the land, the Fourth Ward. You know, the freeway came through, wiped out the colored library. It wiped out Pilgrim's Temple. It wiped out all of those. We should now be stretching out in the middle of the highway saying to TxDOT, you need to do more to preserve the culture because of the culture that you have destroyed. The concept of the fact that the highway system in Houston started in 1950 on the corner of what was in Dowling and Jefferson. Right. Okay. The entire highway system that we see started right there in our neighborhood, wiped out a big part of their neighborhood, of our neighborhood, because one, we weren't allowed to live south of Alabama. Right. Okay. That was only recently, once in 1946, 1947, that we were allowed to live south of Alabama in Third Ward. And you could tell by the structures, what's frame and what's brick. But what we have not done is we have not recognized that we must put forth an effort to recover everything that we can and not walk away from our communities and leave them to little Becky that's going to be running around here, jogging down Emancipation with her carriage and her dog. That we must get in there and fight for those things because they are valuable, not just because of the location, but the value with gas at $6 a gallon, the value of owning property and keeping ownership that everybody fought so well. Can you imagine what they went through in 1872 to raise that kind of money? That amounted to $1 billion for them to raise that kind of money.
Ladies' homes, cleaning, a lot of taking care of kids. Let me say this part too before we get through, because one of the things I have really been on trajectory of making sure our people are educated, not only about their history, but the power that the vote has and why it's so important that we put that on the front burner of everything right now, because they're trying to take away our power through our voting. And our people are so busy partying and watching crazy stuff on TV that they don't know how it's going to affect them. So I would hope that with this, everything that's going on the Juneteenth, that there are voter registration things going on. I'm not sure, but I know that the churches, and we did it on our church last Sunday, but the churches, I want to say to you, if you are listening to me, you need to go to your pastor and say, I want to start a voter registration for all of our members, our children, our teens, our community. We got to get involved. You just can't go take your one vote. You got to get your village together and get them registered, vote, informed, and whatever. So I just wanted to say the church has been so critical in this. We need to go back and support our churches and be there and teach our children. The teaching came out of there. The ethics and however we carried ourselves came out of the churches. Voting came out of the churches. Politicians were in the churches. So we have got to look at the voting part. I'm going to be my women's conference that is coming up on July 15th. I want y'all to mark that date and be there. Algenita is going to be back with us too. We're going to be talking about, because she's a part of the NAACP, and we're going to be talking about next thing about what's really going on with this voting, what kind of power you have and what kind of power you're allowing other people to have when you don't vote. I have sessions on every particular office that is open for re-election, from the governor all the way down, what they do and how it affects you, and then also what this voter suppression thing is, what it looks like, dissecting it, so that you can not allow them to just take away what our ancestors have fought for so long. And so why would they want to do the suppression? Because they know if they suppress your vote, they're going to take away your power. And I called it this to a group of people. I said, we're about to go back on a plantation. And it's not going to be a plantation where it's going to be just Black people. It's going to be white people too. Anybody who does not agree with the powers that be. If you don't get the right people in there, they're going to nullify your votes. They're going to do things that, like right now, I'm like, how is it that most of the world, the United States, they don't want to take away the abortion rights. They don't want to take away that. But the lawmakers have already put us on a plantation. So I don't care what y'all said, we taking it away. Mm-hmm. Gun control. We want gun control. And then, I don't care what you say about gun control. We're going to go ahead and give a 18-year-old, this machine gun. We are starting to the foundation is set up for this new plantation. And we better get out and vote. We better train up our kids and make sure they do it. So any closing remarks before I...
So I do want to, one thing I didn't mention is that Texas was not the last state to free its enslaved population. I know people always think that, but it's not true. So we have, Kentucky and Delaware didn't emancipate their population until 6 months after the proclamation was enforced. And then I think Missouri was one of the other states. So Texas was not the last state to free its enslaved population. And the colored troops came with Granger, not the Buffalo Soldiers. There were no Buffalo Soldiers in 1865. I think it was the 62nd military group, and the 25th came with Granger. And they didn't want to come because they thought they might be stuck there, might be enslaved. And so, but it was not the Buffalo Soldiers. There were no Buffalo Soldiers in 1865.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, Sister Algenita, do you have a closing remark, a very quick one, because we are out of time. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Listen, it's been great. There's been so much information that you guys have given us. So thank you for sharing what you have learned and what you know. I really know it's going to make a great impact on people. And as they're going out to celebrate Juneteenth, they know what it is, they know why it's important, and they know where to go to get more information. And so you guys have been just wonderful. So thank you guys for joining us on Tea Talk today. And
thank you for having me.
Father's Day again, and we'll see you tomorrow for the Father's Day message. Go out and celebrate Juneteenth. Our forefathers fought so hard for it,